15 years ago, China passed the Anti-Secession Law. That law was introduced to reinforce China's commitment to resolving the Taiwan issue and to oppose secessionist forces on the island. So, how does the law express the central government's will and determination to defend national sovereignty? Have there been changes over the past 15 years in terms of national security? And what about the current tensions in Taiwan and in Hong Kong SAR? What measures will the mainland take to maintain its territorial integrity? To talk about these and more, I'm joined by Zhong Houtao, Research Fellow from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Professor Shen Dingli from Fudan University, and Joanna Lei, Managing Director of Azure Management. Earlier, I also spoke to Andy Tsang Wai Hong. He was the Deputy Director of the National Narcotics Control Commission in the Ministry of Public Security. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. Let me start with you, Mr. Zhong. The Anti-Secession Law came into force in 2005. I was still a reporter covering NPC back then. I remember it formalized the idea of non-peaceful means. Not by force, but non-peaceful means. It's probably a euphemism. But it is used to prevent any attempt by Taiwan to gain independence. Do you think that law has worked in terms of defending the One China principle over the years?
Of course, in the past 15 years, the anti-secession law has been playing important, or we could define it as an indispensable law in deterring the Taiwan independent forces and in promoting the peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. First, it has been deterring Taiwan independent forces. That means if the Taiwan independent forces try to separate any part of China, especially try to separate Taiwan from China, the Chinese mainland will be compelled to implement the anti-secession law. That means we could resort to the non-peaceful use to defend our sovereignty and territorial integrity. We will never allow anyone, any person, any organization, any political party to separate any part of China at any time. At the same time, it has also been promoting peace and stability across Taiwan Strait. It has been promoting the peaceful development across Taiwan Strait. For example, in the last year, the trade volume between the two sides has reached more than 2,000 million US dollars. That reached the highest land point in history. And the people-to-people contact in the past year has also reached to 9 million. At the same time, it also sent a strong message to the foreign intervention or foreign interferences, especially to United States and Japan. That means the Taiwan issue is China's internal issue, and we will never allow any foreign country to intervene in our internal affairs.
And Ms. Lei, back then, 15 years ago, it was Chen Shui-bian in power. Now it's Tsai Ing-wen, DPP leaders. But how did Taiwan people respond to the law 15 years ago, and has it evolved over the past years?
I think this is a very observant question, because if you look at what happened after the passing of the law, there are two bookends, which is Chen Shui-bian's last 3 years and Tsai Ing-wen's first 4 years. And in the middle is Ma Ying-jeou's 8 years. So it actually talks about the dichotomy of the law. On the one hand, it does draw a very strong red line in terms of anyone pushing Taiwan independence will be retaliated. But on the other hand, it does allow Taiwan certain international space once that issue is non-existent. So when Ma Ying-jeou was in power, the anti-secession law was not discussed, when in fact those years were characterized by system-to-system, even administration or government-to-government negotiation with lots of trade pacts signed. So I think it is very important that all measures have countermeasures. When anti-secession law was passed, Chen Shui-bian quickly did away with the guidelines for national unification. Therefore, in Taiwan, in the past 15 years, no mention of national unification. He also did away with the Council for National Unification. So on the local level, there are no discussion on national unification, and that pushes DPP to further taken away all mentions of national unification, and that's the unlikely or unwelcome result happening in Taiwan.
As you mentioned the reunification of the mainland references, it seems the DPP is planning to totally delete that provision of the regulation of the people-to-people relations between Taiwan and mainland. First of all, what exactly is that document? Does that have legal mandate, and why does DPP want to simply skip it all at once now?
Well, there are three major documents and/or organizations. During the late 1990s, the KMT government actually formed guidelines for national unification that divided the eventual unification into three phases. And with that mandate, the guidelines, there also was a Council for National Unification. With that, the KMT government also passed law that governs cross-strait relations, which is the currently governing law in terms of all communications or all people-to-people exchanges. DPP currently has a discussion or a bill to do away with Article 1, which says this is to govern relationship between mainland China as an area and Taiwan as an area before the national unification. So it is a very clear pro-unification mandate that says before that eventual time, we have to have something pragmatic to govern relationship and to help people-to-people exchanges. And DPP is trying to take away the umbrella, the ambient, the most major umbrella, and that will challenge the political dialogue foundation across Taiwan Strait as well.
And Mr. Shen, do you think this is why Beijing has been changed their reading of what is happening across Taiwan Strait? Because it seems there is more talks about the possibility of non-peaceful resolution of the Taiwan issue recently, and we see a more frequent Navy navigation in the Taiwan Strait from the mainland.
Well, different people have a different reading, but for many, including myself, I see the increasing the trend that some pro-independence Taiwan-based people are pushing the envelope, sliding toward from the de facto, the kind of a virtual independence to become a legal independence. Then the anti-secession law has three triggers. Any one or a combination of these triggers, if they would be triggered, then the mainland has to respond through non-peaceful means to respond to such a kind of happening. So the first one is that some people is making Taiwan independent, is making it a reality, a new factor. Taiwan is not independent, but some people are pushing, but that is triggering the second condition, that people are pushing Taiwan to be independent. Taiwan is not independent yet, but if we don't tell them you would have consequence, they would continue to push envelope. And third, we used to say we place hope on the Taiwan people, but then you look at the reality, probably more and more the local-based people are not talking about the eventual independence. And that has been written into our law, anti-secession law. If it's no longer possible for a peaceful reunification, but the mainland still has a mandate of reunification.
You meant
then we have to
increasing numbers of people are not
means.
talking about reunification in Taiwan.
Rather than not to talk about it, but they are talking about enjoying the virtual independence, and if the time would be mature to make a de jure, a virtual legal independence. And these are very threatening, so we have to address the law on the 15th anniversary to remind those You have a law there, don't evoke it.
But Mr. Zhong, why hasn't Beijing clarified what exactly is the trigger to use non-peaceful means? For example, will the cancellation of the reunification of the motherland references be read as a trigger, or the de jure announcement of independence of Taiwan as a country as a trigger? Can Beijing clarify?
Actually, it seems a little bit ambiguous clause in the anti-secession law to say in what kind of circumstances to use the non-peaceful means to realize our reunification. Still, to some extent, it is still very clear. For example, just as you said, if the Taiwan Authority or Taiwan, any kind of separatist moves try to separate Taiwan or to declare Taiwan independence, then the Chinese mainland will, of course, implement the anti-secession law. At the same time, if the United States or Japan try to intervene in Taiwan affairs, to intervene in our internal affairs, then the Chinese mainland, of course, will to implement this law. And the third point is that if our national reunification process is prolonged for a long time and it seems endless, then the Chinese mainland will try to implement this law. So apparently it is very ambiguous, but in fact it is very clear.
And Ms. Lei, on May the 20th, when Tsai Ing-wen delivered her second term inaugural speech, she said she would maintain the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. But what is her understanding of status quo? What exactly does she mean?
Well, that is an extremely important point, because in her first inaugural speech, she made the same reference that she would try to maintain status quo. And we must remember the status quo at that time was that we have government-to-government negotiation and have official trade pacts being signed. And lots of people enjoyed the benefits from the trade pacts, from the free travel, and from all free communications. It's very easy to see the status quo today has moved quite far away from the 2016 status quo. So I think it is very important for Taiwan to understand whether we're talking about the status quo as peace across Taiwan Strait, or the eventual independence as being interpreted by DPP, which gradually, as they are slicing the salami, have moving in that direction. But I think there's a third option, that is to see status quo as exactly said in the law, which they tried to do away, that is before the unification of the nation. That is to see a pre-unification stage as status quo. And if Taiwan can go back to that stage, I think there will be a lot of issues resolved, because certainly before Tsai Ing-wen's inaugural speech, I'm sure there are a lot of messages sent to her through back channels, lots of real serious threats, so that she has taken back from the very strong pro-independence stance and took a very mild maintenance of status quo stance in her second speech.
And Ms. Lei, from the perspective of Beijing, probably the big question is, how far will she go? Because she seems to be trying to test the bottom line from the mainland. What else will she do in order to maintain the status quo as she understood, but also maintain peace across the Taiwan Strait?
Well, certainly there are three things being permeating at this time. One is to take away the references to before the unification of the nation. The second was a potential referendum in terms of a pro-Taiwan independence referendum vote. And the third one is a change of the current constitution in certain provisions, which is now being discussed. And let me add, there's a fourth one, which is to welcome more of the American intervention into the cross-strait issues by welcoming more involvement in the local domestic affairs as well as military exercises by the United States.
Is it like she would do all four of them?
Being discussed, and that is also a likelihood. The first three have already been proposed by different fractions within DPP. And the fourth one is something that we believe the administrative part is negotiating at this point.
So, Mr. Chen, how will Beijing react if Tsai Ing-wen did all those four things?
Well, I think Tsai Ing-wen wants to send a few messages by mentioning status quo. She may think the status quo first means Taiwan is autonomous. So it does not depend upon the mainland. It is its own, it has its own integrity. So mainland should not touch Taiwan as Taiwan is its own. So far, mainland has not used non-peaceful means to make Taiwan difficult. So mainland in the future should continue to do this. So I think this is the first message she wants to send. Second, Taiwan, by this time, she said, has already been independent. So we are not doing something to make Taiwan independent because we are already independent. The anti-secession law, the first trigger says, if they are making Taiwan, if they have made Taiwan independent, we still think Taiwan's so-called constitution has included the mainland land as a part of the entire territory of the Taiwan, under Taiwan's name. And that means Taiwan, mainland combined to make one country. They have not changed the constitution. That constitution, in our view, has a problem, but at least for themselves, they have not changed.
So you're saying that
Tsai
Ing-wen will not change the constitution as it is, and that will, because she knows that will be a trigger for the use of non-peaceful means.
Yes, yes. For this, mainland can justify why we don't use non-peaceful means against Taiwan at this moment is that they have not done it. If they are doing it, they have finished doing it, then the first trigger will be triggered. Second is they are pushing the envelope to change. If we don't tell them there is a law, they may have the gut, they may have the courage to change. That would be viewed by the mainland as triggering the second condition, for which mainland can say they are very much pushing for this. So if I'm willing, I can beat you right now. So we would send a very strong message. You are violating, so you deserve our punishment. If you do a little more, then Taiwan receives a message. They say for the cross-strait people-to-people relationship act, they are not going to delete the article which says such a cross-strait people-to-people relationship act, eventual purpose is to achieve unification. Some member in Taiwan's lawmaking apparatus try to delete it. Then they get the message. America is unhappy, mainland is unhappy, despite China-US challenges. America is still telling Taiwan, don't do.
Okay.
And as they say, we would not do. Taiwan is not doing, and this so-called parliament members, they are not doing. This is exactly, we tell them there is such a law. So the law, in my view, has achieved its purpose.
Yeah. You talked about the U.S.
We will continue.
Go ahead, Mr. Chen.
We will continue to use this law to tell America, if American would venture to intervene militarily, then be prepared for a very dirty engagement.
Okay,
Mr.
Zhou, obviously the U.S. has been playing a big role here, and many people accuse the United States using Taiwan as a bargaining chip. And recently, U.S. Congress upgraded their relations with Taiwan, adding a political dimension to commercial and cultural allies, which is very risky for Beijing. So where do you think Washington is headed?
As everyone knows, the United States has been playing the Taiwan card, and it has been taking Taiwan as a leverage to contain Chinese mainland. And especially after Donald Trump taking office in 2000, the situation becomes much worse and worse. And as for now, the United States is eroding one China policy. For example, in the White House official document, it's publicly defined Taiwan as a kind of the so-called nation or state. And just several days ago, the U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo called Tsai Ing-wen as the president of Taiwan. And I think in this way, they are provoking the Chinese mainland's bottom line. At the same time, they are trying to upgrade the economic relations between United States and Taiwan, especially to attract more investment from Taiwan. The third point is that they are strengthening their military relationship. For example, they are preparing another round of arms sales to Taiwan. So in this way, you could find that the United States is indeed provoking the Chinese mainland's bottom line. Still, I want to emphasize that the United States is not helping Taiwan. It is just using Taiwan. Just as Professor Shen said, it is taking advantage of Taiwan. And finally, I think it will damage Taiwan or jeopardize Taiwan. So in this case, I think the Taiwan should keep clear of its stance. It should be very think twice for how to stand between Chinese mainland and Taiwan. If it continue to allow United States to confront with the Chinese mainland, I think the Taiwan will become much more dangerous in future.
And Ms. Lei, the only reason that Taiwan can cozy up to Washington is because Trump did something extraordinary. But really, is Washington and Taipei thinking about the same thing on Taiwan?
Well, certainly from Taipei's point of view, they are relying on a strong support from the United States. But if we look at the recent example of WHA, the U.S. support is mere words and less action in reality. There is a clear difference between the Korean War era, the Vietnam War area, when U.S. used Taiwan as a major political and military backdrop and with a corresponding guarantee to safeguard the peace and stability across Taiwan Straits. Right now, the U.S. stands in using Taiwan as a potential ally in the Indo-Pacific strategy, has no corresponding guarantee for safeguarding Taiwan's peace and stability. So I think the two sides certainly are not on the same page.
All right, let's move on from Taiwan to Hong Kong SAR. And earlier on the draft security legislation for Hong Kong, I talked to Andy Zhang Wei-hom, Deputy Director of the National Narcotics Control Commission of the Ministry of Public Security. Mr. Zhang, thank you for taking this interview. There has been resumption of protests in recent days in response to the draft of national security law in Hong Kong. So what are your opinions of the law?
Now, I think we need to be clear about the purpose of the present bill. The bill is intended to plug a legal loophole which will enable Hong Kong to deal with the present threat, which is very serious. The threat we're talking about are threat against, not only threat against the internal security of Hong Kong, but also the national security of the country, as can be seen in the disturbances in the city over the past 12 months.
But I think the protesters, or even some Hong Kong people, fear that that might squeeze, if not eliminate, the rise of Hong Kong people. What do you say to those people who have this kind of worry?
I believe it's only the early days, and I'm sure the bill and the subsequent legislation will be clearly explained to the people of Hong Kong, to the people of the country, and the people of the world at large. Now, with the very clear focus of the law, now the law is about offenses relating to separatism, relating to overthrowing of the government, relating to act of terrorism, as well as interference by foreign and external powers. So these are not offenses that ordinary members of public will trample on. And so the ordinary members of public have nothing to fear. On the contrary, given what happened in Hong Kong in the past 12 months, the law, when introduced, will put a stop to all these threats that members of the public are exposed to in the past 12 months. They will be better protected. And I don't think their freedom and rights will in any way be affected by the new law, and in any way.
But what we saw last weekend in Hong Kong seems to prove that it's not easy to get the message across. What are the particular challenges faced by the Hong Kong police in such a metropolitan city and also a very unique Chinese city?
Now, what happened in Hong Kong in the past 2 days actually proved the seriousness of the threat that Hong Kong is exposed to, or that the country is exposed to. What we're talking about are acts that directly challenges the national security of the country and the internal security of Hong Kong. The continuation of these sort of activities actually reinforces the need for the bill to be introduced and the new legislation to be introduced. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, we need to explain this clearly to the people of Hong Kong, to the people of China, of the country, and of the world as a whole, to allay any unnecessary fear.
And to expect the police force will change their tactics or even strategy in dealing with protesters later on?
Now, the police in Hong Kong have been extremely restrained in the past 12 months. They are there to uphold the law. And so I'm sure they will faithfully uphold the law even when the new legislation are passed. There's no reason to doubt otherwise.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhang.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Mr. Shen, we're running out of time, 2 minutes left. What do you think were the major challenge for this law to be implemented in Hong Kong?
Well, first we need to convince Hong Kong people that mainland China interests them, but their system has failed our trust by not making Hong Kong-based national security law for 23 years. It's their fault, not our fault. Given this, we do have a right to make a national security law which is applicable in Hong Kong. But as Mr. Zheng has explained clearly, this only applied to 4 situations. Majority people may not be relevant to that. But some Hong Kong people may distrust us, thinking we may abuse our new law. This is something we need to do to convince Hong Kong people we would live by our action. We would not abuse.
But
so
do you think the violence on the streets will escalate or will die down?
If we can be successful in convincing them, especially after making the law, we would honor our word by not abusing. I think this kind of their suspicion would gradually phase out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shen. Thank you also Mr. Zhong and Ms. Lei for your insights. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.